I knew something was terribly wrong the morning my key hesitated in the lock, as if the metal could no longer remember me. It scraped once, twice, and for a breath, I stood there with the grocery bag biting into my forearm and thought, this is my door, our door, the door Carl hung himself one winter night when the hinges squealed like gulls. It should welcome me, the way the smell of starch welcomes freshly ironed sheets. When the bolt finally gave, I stepped into the hallway we painted butter yellow after he retired, the color he said would hold sunlight even on gloomy days. The floor creaked in the familiar places, by the umbrella stand, one step before the kitchen threshold, and yet the house felt tilted, as if it were quietly sliding away from me. I set the milk in the fridge, wiped a ring of condensation with my sleeve, and pressed my palm flat on the counter where Carl used to rest his coffee mug while he whistled through his teeth. "We built this," he would say, tapping the wood he sanded for hours. "With our hands, Anna, stone by stone, board by board." He never claimed it as his. He said ours, like a prayer. I am 72 now, and I have stayed on my knees for decades scrubbing a floor that taught me the map of our life in stains and scratches. I have stitched curtains by lamplight, cooked soups that smelled of dill and forgiveness, and mended the small hurts of a family the way other women darn socks. If I have a crown, it is made of pins and shopping lists and the little savings tucked away after the electricity bill. All of it, every humble thing I ever did, rests in these rooms the way an echo rests in a church after the choir stops singing. So when the door hesitated, I felt, in the same instant, a hesitation inside me. It started innocently, as betrayals always do. My son David would drive me to the clinic, and on the way, he would sigh the way young men sigh when the world is not a simple staircase, but a maze. "Ma," he'd say, "you don't need to worry about paperwork. Everything's digital now. I can handle bills, taxes, all that boring stuff. You focus on your health." He had a good smile, the same dimple his father had, which made me think of summers when Carl and I slept on the floor while the paint dried, eating cherries over the sink and spitting the pits into a bowl like children. David's wife, Melissa, always spoke in tidy sentences that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. "It's not safe for you to manage things alone," she said once, glancing at the drawer where I kept envelopes. "Scammers target older people. We just want to protect you." I nodded because I like being protected. Who doesn't? But I should have remembered that protection can become a cage if someone keeps the key. They helped me set up online banking, and I let David write down passwords just in case, because just in case is a kind of lullaby for widows. He installed a newer phone with bigger numbers that blinked instructions in patient blue. He brought forms too, already printed, saying they were for emergencies, power of attorney if something happened, nothing binding, just signatures to put in a folder. I signed where he pointed while a pot of soup simmered, and the steam fogged the window like a veil. If trust were a fabric, mine was heavy and warm. I wrapped my shoulders in it and never checked whether moths had been busy in the night. The house swallowed our years and held them like a jar holds buttons. I can list them by the rooms. In the bedroom, the wardrobe Carl built from pine that smelled like a storybook. In the hall, the notch in the baseboard where David ran a toy truck too hard and cried until I kissed his hair and said even the house liked to be bumped once in a while. In the kitchen, the dent in the table where the Christmas roast fell off a platter, and we laughed until we couldn't breathe. In the small room, with the east-facing window, a sewing machine waiting like an old friend who doesn't judge if you forget her birthday. In the living room, The plant I coaxed into a kind of stubborn jungle, its leaves urgent and green even in January. I cannot explain to anyone who counts money like pulses how wealth accumulates in these details. You don't sell this. It sells you to the life you promised to keep. The letter arrived in a crisp white envelope with a company logo that looked modern and harmless, like a dentist's smile. I almost ignored it, thinking it was an advertisement for new windows, but something in the paper's weight felt official. "Dear Ms. Novak," it began, which made me smile. No one calls me that except the tax office, and people who haven't learned the tenderness of Anna. The letter confirmed an appointment for a final viewing and mentioned access through the lockbox with instructions sent to the buyer's agent. I reread those words 3 times because they arranged themselves on the page like furniture in a stranger's house. Final viewing, lockbox, buyer. It was as if someone had translated my life into a language I did not speak. I dialed David. He didn't pick up. I sent a message, the new phone blinking with comfort I did not feel. "What is this?" I wrote, attaching a picture of the letter. He replied with a voice note. Young people like their voices more than their words. "Don't worry, Ma," he said, his voice busy with another room. "It's nothing you need to stress about. We're just exploring options in case the place becomes too much. We talked about it, remember? I'll swing by this weekend and explain." I do not remember that conversation. What I remember is an afternoon last spring when I asked Melissa if she liked cherries, and she said, "Careful with pits, they stain." Perhaps that was the conversation after all, about stains and who must live with them. By Friday, my balance looked different on the screen, light as a coat you can no longer find. A transfer had occurred between associated accounts. Associated, another word that floats like a balloon until it pops. I went to the bank because I believe in faces, not portals. The clerk spoke softly, as if we were in church again. She asked me to confirm the transfer of savings into a consolidated family account for estate planning. Her mouth made the shape of compassion. Her eyes kept returning to the numbers. I said there had been a mistake. She said she would escalate it. The room grew narrower. When I came home, I opened the cupboard where I keep flour and sugar, the ordinary things, and measured out panic the way bakers measure vanilla, just enough to make everything taste like something you can't quite name. I took out the folder where I'd placed the forms David brought. Power of attorney. Durable. Springing. Words that dress themselves up to appear harmless, then marry your future without asking. I couldn't remember if I had signed the durable one. The signature looked like mine, and also like a tired river. My hand began to shake, then stopped because old hands know how to steady themselves by simply pressing into a table. I reheated soup I didn't want and tried to swallow calm. The clock's tick sounded like footsteps walking toward a door that would not open for me again. Saturday morning, the sky wore that blank color that makes the city look like it has been wiped with a damp cloth. I swept the hallway because sweeping is how I pray. I set out cups and a plate of cookies in case anyone came to talk like civilized people, which is my favorite kind of talking. At 10 to 11, a car pulled up, sleek and quiet, the kind that doesn't so much park as pattern the street with its confidence. 2 women stepped out, one in a camel coat, the other with a clipboard smile. A man followed, younger, with shoes that made no sound. They came up the walk as if the stones belonged to them. I opened the door before they could ring, smoothing my cardigan as if politeness were armor. "Can I help you?" I asked, and the woman in the coat said my address the way a doctor says a diagnosis. "We have a scheduled viewing," she added, and her tongue made the word gentle, like a lesson for children. The clipboard woman showed me her phone with a code that apparently unlocked something important, perhaps my next breath. The young man glanced past me into the hallway toward the butter-yellow walls. "Charming bones," he said, like someone reading a menu. For a second that expanded until it took up the whole day. I thought of Carl standing behind me, his hand steady on my shoulder, the way men of his generation learned to steady wood on a workbench. I heard him say ours again, low and certain. Something inside me rose like bread, just before it becomes bread, a swell you can't push down without ruining everything. "There is no viewing," I answered, my voice a tone lower than I expected, as if the floor had spoken through me. The woman tilted her head. "The seller's agent confirmed access," she said, and then she said my son's name next, neatly, almost kindly, and added that he had assured them Mom is aware. The word Mom did not feel like me in her mouth. She looked past my shoulder. "We'll be quick," she said. I stepped into the doorway until the frame pressed against both my arms, and for the first time since I buried my husband, I felt something in me harden into a post that would not move even if the flood came. "No," I said, and the sound of it surprised us all. In the small silence that followed, the lock behind me clicked on its own. Old houses make such noises, grief squeezing through wood. And the camel coat woman blinked. The young man shifted his weight, then held up his phone and said, "We have the deed." He turned the screen toward me as if it were a candle in a cave. There it was, my address, my name once, and then not again, a document that said the house I built with my husband's hands belonged to someone else entirely. My heart did the thing hearts do when they remember they are fists. I did not step back. I tightened my grip on the door frame, felt the paint under my fingertips, and told myself this: if I am a house, I will hold. I set my jaw so tightly that the words of that man with the glowing phone screen could not slip inside me. My house, my walls, my Carl's laughter that still lingered in the cracks, none of that could be erased by a digital deed. Yet my legs trembled under me, and I gripped the door frame so they would not notice. When the strangers finally left, murmuring about legal processes and smooth transitions, I closed the door as softly as one closes a coffin. I leaned against it and pressed my forehead to the wood. For a long while, I listened to the house breathe around me, the hum of the fridge, the tick of the clock, the faint rush of water in the pipes, trying to decide if it still knew me as its mistress or if I had already become a guest. That night, I barely slept. Shadows of Carl's tools in the shed stretched across my mind, hammer handles worn by his palm, sawdust that smelled of pine and sweat. How could the house we built stone by stone become a line on a contract, passed from one hand to another like a loaf of bread? Around 3 a.m, I pulled down a dusty shoebox from the closet. Inside were old photographs. David as a boy in overalls holding a wooden plane, Carl kneeling behind him, guiding his little hands. Another photo, Melissa smiling stiffly at our dining table, already moving the salt shaker 2 inches to the left as if she owned the space. I traced their faces with my finger, but instead of comfort, I felt only betrayal's chill. How long had they planned this? How many conversations had I missed, hidden under phrases like "don't worry" and "we'll handle it"? My trust had been stolen quietly, signature by signature, until I was left with nothing but questions. The next morning, I marched myself to the bank again. The young clerk, her lipstick still smudged from breakfast coffee, blinked nervously when she saw me. I demanded to see the manager. He came, a man with tired eyes and the calm voice of someone who has explained too many times that numbers speak louder than tears. "Mrs. Novak," he said, "your son has legal authority to make these transfers. According to the documents, you granted him durable power of attorney last year." I told him I never meant for that paper to become a weapon. He sighed, lowered his voice, and whispered what no one else dared to say. "Unless you can prove coercion, the law sides with him." The words hit me like ice water down my spine. I walked home in silence, my groceries heavy in my arms, though they contained nothing but bread and apples. At home, I boiled tea I could not drink. The house felt foreign. I touched the banister Carl had varnished until it gleamed, and it felt cold, like marble in a mausoleum. For the first time in years, I locked my bedroom door before lying down. I feared that in the morning I would find more strangers walking through the rooms, measuring curtains, calling my memories charming features. My hands shook as I clutched the quilt Carl's mother had sewn. If I closed my eyes, I could almost hear him say, "Anna, you must fight for what is ours." But how does a 72-year-old widow fight when the enemy is her own flesh and blood? 2 days later, David arrived. He didn't knock. He used his key. That small act, entering without asking, cut me deeper than any signature. "Ma, why are you making this so hard?" he said, dropping his phone onto the counter like it was another plate to wash. I asked him if he remembered building birdhouses with Carl, if he remembered promising on his father's grave to care for me until my last breath. His eyes darted away, ashamed or perhaps only annoyed. "Things change," he muttered. Melissa stepped in behind him, her perfume sharp, her smile thinner than glass. "This place is too much for you, Anna. You'll be better off in a retirement community, safe, with friends your age, no more worrying about leaky pipes or broken fences." Her words were syrup poured over poison. I shook my head, my heart hammering so loudly I thought it might crack my ribs. "This is my home," I whispered, "and I will not leave." Melissa's smile disappeared. She opened her purse, pulled out a folded contract, and laid it on my kitchen table, the table where Carl once carved our initials with the tip of a knife, laughing like a boy. "It's done," she said coldly. "The deed is transferred. The buyers expect to move in by the end of the month. Don't embarrass David by resisting. Think of your grandson, how he'll benefit from the financial security." I stared at the paper, but the words swam like dark fish I could not catch. My throat tightened. For a moment the room blurred and I thought I might collapse. But something inside me, perhaps Carl's spirit, perhaps the stubbornness of every woman who has ever scrubbed floors until her knees bled, rose up. I stood straight, taller than I had in years, and tore the contract in half with shaking hands. The sound of ripping paper cracked through the kitchen like thunder. David shouted. Melissa gasped. But I felt stronger, even as tears streaked my cheeks. "This is my house," I said, my voice trembling but loud enough to fill every corner of the home we built. "And if you want me out, you'll have to carry me through that door like a corpse." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the clock ticking its indifferent rhythm. David's face twisted between anger and guilt. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Melissa pressed her lips tight, gathering the shredded papers as though the pieces could still be glued back into power. I stood rooted, my hand pressed to the counter, Carl had once sanded smooth, and for the first time since his death, I felt him there with me, solid, unyielding. The fight was not over. I knew lawyers, courts, and more papers lay ahead, all of them lined up like soldiers against an old woman's heart. But in that moment, I reclaimed something David and Melissa could never sell: my voice, my defiance, my refusal to vanish quietly. My house had chosen its side, and it stood with me. The house was silent after they stormed out, but it was not a peaceful silence. It was the kind that follows a slammed door, when the echoes still tremble in the wood. I walked from room to room, touching the walls as if they might steady me. My fingers traced the butter-yellow paint Carl and I once brushed on together, the uneven lines we left near the ceiling because the ladder wobbled. Back then, the imperfections made us laugh. Now, they felt like scars, proof that life is lived in flaws, not contracts. I whispered into the air, as though Carl could hear me. They want to take it all, but I won't let them. The words steadied me, yet behind them was a tide of fear I could not hold back forever. I did not sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the lamp burning weakly, sorting through drawers. Bills, letters, old recipes written in Carl's hand. And then the folder. Inside it lay the copies of the documents David had made me sign. My eyes blurred, but I forced myself to read them. Durable power of attorney, estate planning, transfer of assets. Each page felt like a knife slipped between my ribs. My own signature stared back at me in shaky ink, betraying me more than my son's silence ever could. I could almost hear Melissa's voice, patient and sweet. "Just sign here, Anna. It's for emergencies only." Fool that I was, I had signed away not just paper, but the roof over my head, the kitchen where my soups had healed fevers, the bedroom where I whispered prayers into Carl's pillow. By morning, my hands shook so badly I dropped the teacup. It shattered into a dozen sharp little truths on the floor. I didn't bother sweeping them. Instead, I put on my coat and walked to see Clara, my oldest friend. She lived 3 blocks away, in a smaller flat filled with plants that reached greedily for the light. She opened the door, saw my face, and pulled me inside before I could speak. "Anna," she said, "sit down. Tell me everything." And so I did. I told her about the letter, the bank, the strangers who came for a viewing, and the contract I had torn in half. My voice broke when I said David's name. I had raised him on lullabies and potatoes, on scraped knees kissed better, on nights I stayed awake sewing costumes for his school plays. Now he had turned those years into currency to buy my silence. Clara listened without interruption, her hand covering mine, warm and firm. When I finished, she took a deep breath. "You need a lawyer," she said. "Not tomorrow, not next week. Today." The word lawyer made my stomach knot, but I nodded. Clara fetched her phone, dialed a number, and within minutes she had arranged an appointment with her cousin, who worked in property law. "Bring every paper you have," she instructed. "Don't let David or Melissa near them again." Her voice was sharp, almost motherly. For the first time in weeks, I felt like someone was on my side. That afternoon, I carried the folder like it was a baby made of glass. The lawyer's office was across town, filled with books whose spines looked heavier than my grief. His name was Mr. Klein, a middle-aged man with silver hair and eyes that flicked quickly from page to page. He examined the documents in silence, his brow furrowing deeper as he read. At last he looked up. "Mrs. Novak, I won't lie to you. These papers give your son significant control. But," and here his voice lowered, "there may be grounds to contest them. if you signed without understanding, if there was undue influence, if he acted against your best interest, these can all be challenged in court. The word court made me shiver. I pictured myself on a wooden bench, strangers listening as my life was dissected. Could I bear such a thing? How long? I asked. Mr. Klein leaned back in his chair. Months, sometimes years. But if you want to keep your home, this is the road. I closed my eyes. Years. At 72, years are not given freely. Each one must be wrestled from fate. But what choice did I have? When I returned home, the house greeted me with the smell of dust and silence. I brewed tea, though it tasted like paper in my mouth, and sat by the window. Children ran outside, their laughter piercing the heavy air. Once, David had laughed like that, chasing kites with Carl in the garden. I pressed my forehead to the glass, the coolness calming me. I thought of calling him, of asking him why, of pleading like a mother who still believes in forgiveness. But then I remembered Melissa's cold smile, the way she laid that contract on my table as if she were serving dessert. No, forgiveness has its place, but not when it becomes a leash. The next day, a letter arrived. Not white this time, but cream-colored, embossed with the logo of a law firm I did not recognize. My fingers trembled as I tore it open. Inside, the words marched in black ink. Notice of possession transfer. They expected me to vacate the property within 30 days. 30 days to erase a lifetime. 30 days to pack Carl's tools, the quilt, the photographs, the very air that smelled of dill and lavender. 30 days to vanish. My chest tightened until I thought I might not breathe again. That night, I sat at Carl's workbench in the shed. The tools hung neatly, just as he left them. I touched the hammer, the one he used to hang our wedding photo above the mantel. I touched the plane he had guided in David's small hands. My tears fell on the wood, staining it darker. Carl, I whispered, what do I do? How do I fight our own son? In the stillness, the shed seemed to sigh, and I imagined his answer. Stone by stone, Anna. We built it that way. We fight that way. Resolve hardened in me. I would not surrender. If they wanted my house, they would have to look me in the eye and drag me out themselves. Until then, every board, every nail, every memory would be my shield. But deep inside, one question burned hotter than the rest. If the law was truly on their side, how much strength did I have left to defy it? When the 30-day notice sat on my kitchen table like a death sentence, I felt my body grow smaller around it. I boiled water for tea 3 times and never drank it. Instead, I walked from room to room, memorizing the patterns of light as if they might disappear tomorrow. The living room, where Carl once strung fairy lights at Christmas, still carried a faint smell of pine when the sun hit the window at noon. The hallway echoed differently now, heavier, as if it already mourned my leaving. Yet each creak of the floorboards seemed to whisper, stand, don't bow. The next morning, Clara arrived unannounced, her hair still damp from the shower, cheeks pink from the wind. She set down a basket of rolls and, without asking, filled my kettle. Eat, she ordered. I told her about the notice, about the lawyer's cautious hope, about my own shrinking courage. She listened, jaw tight, then said, Anna, you are not alone. Do you think you're the only woman this has happened to? Men, sons, nephews, even daughters, taking from their elders under the disguise of care? No, but you can be one of the few who stand against it. She reached into her bag and handed me a small recorder. Start speaking. Tell your story, every detail. If it goes to court, your words will matter. And if—" She hesitated, her eyes softening. "If you don't live to see the end, at least the truth will remain." I looked at the recorder, its red button winking like a tiny heart. My hand shook as I pressed it. My voice came out thin at first, like a thread unraveling. My childhood, meeting Carl, building the house, raising David, the sacrifices, the laughter, the promises, and then the betrayal. Once I began, I could not stop. The words poured out like water breaking through a dam. By the time I switched it off, my throat burned, but I felt lighter, as though I had carved a space in the air that could not be erased. Later that week, Mr. Klein, the lawyer, called me back to his office. He had filed an injunction to delay the transfer. "This buys us time," he explained, sliding papers across his desk. "But you must prepare yourself. They will fight back. Your son, his wife, their lawyers. They will paint you as confused, unstable, incapable of managing your affairs." His words cut deep, because wasn't that what Melissa had already implied, with her slow voice and patient smile? I clenched my fists. "I may be old," I said, "but I am not confused. And if they want to call me unstable, let them come and see how steady I can stand when the walls of my own home surround me." The battle lines were drawn. Days blurred into nights filled with letters, phone calls, and papers spread across my table. Every envelope that landed in my mailbox felt like another bullet. Some neighbors began whispering, pity soft in their eyes. Others avoided me altogether, afraid the storm of shame might spill into their tidy gardens. I could not blame them. People like comfort, not conflict. But Clara never wavered. She came each day, sometimes only to sit with me in silence, her presence a balm stronger than any medicine. One evening, David appeared at the door, alone. He looked older than I remembered, lines around his eyes, shoulders slumped. For a fleeting second, I saw my little boy again, the one who once clung to my apron strings. But then he spoke. "Ma, why are you doing this?" His voice was tired, almost pleading. "We're trying to secure a future. For me, for Melissa, for our son. This house is worth more now than it ever will be again. Don't you see? We can give Max opportunities we never had." Something inside me cracked at the mention of my grandson. Sweet Max, with his sticky fingers and cocoa-scented breath. Did they use his name now as a shield, as justification? I wanted to believe David cared, that this was all misguided love. But then I remembered Melissa's cold contract, the strangers measuring my curtains, the bank clerk's sympathetic eyes. "No," I said quietly but firmly. "This is not about Max. This is about greed dressed up as concern. You have taken my savings, my trust, and now you want the roof Carl built with his hands. No more, David, no more." For a moment his face twisted, torn between anger and sorrow. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His eyes glistened, but whether from regret or frustration, I could not tell. "You'll regret this," he muttered, and turned away. I watched him walk down the path Carl had once laid stone by stone. The garden seemed to shiver in his wake. That night I dreamed of Carl. He stood in the doorway, his work shirt stained, sawdust in his hair. He looked at me the way he did when he caught me weeping once, years ago, after a fight with David over curfew. Back then he had said, "Anna, you cannot hold the boy forever, but you can hold the truth, and it will carry you." In the dream, he repeated those words. When I woke, my pillow was damp, but my heart steadier. The next morning, I began writing letters to newspapers, to community groups, To anyone who might listen, I wrote about the silent theft of elders' homes, about signatures collected under false assurances, about the loneliness of fighting one's own blood. Each letter carried not just my story, but the story of every woman who had ever scrubbed floors and baked bread only to be told she was too old to matter. Clara delivered them for me, her bicycle basket filled with my rage bound in envelopes. A week later, a journalist called. She had received my letter and wanted to hear more. My hand shook as I held the phone, but my voice was strong. I told her everything, each word sharper than the last. When I hung up, I looked around the kitchen, at the walls Carl once painted, at the table scarred by meals and laughter, and I whispered, "They will not erase us." Yet as night fell, a shadow crept in with the cold. For every letter I sent, I feared retaliation. For every word I spoke, I feared silence from those who should protect me. And still, deep down, one fear gnawed louder than the rest. What if the law, blind and merciless, chose their side anyway? The article appeared on a rainy Thursday, tucked between politics and sports. A modest headline, "Elderly Widow Battles Son Over Family Home." My name was changed, but my story was clear. When Clara handed me the newspaper, my hands trembled so badly the pages rattled like dry leaves. I read each line slowly, afraid I might miss myself in the words. But there I was, my years of sacrifice, my husband's craftsmanship, my son's betrayal, all laid bare for strangers to consume with their morning coffee. At first, shame flared in me. To air such wounds in public felt indecent, as though I had walked naked into the street. Yet as I read again, I felt something else stir, vindication. For once, the silence wasn't mine to carry alone. That afternoon, the phone began to ring. Some calls were curious neighbors whispering. Some were women I barely knew, their voices raw with recognition. One said, "My nephew did the same to me." Another confessed she had signed papers without understanding, just like I had. "You are brave," they told me. I didn't feel brave. I felt tired, my bones heavy, my chest tight. But their words wrapped around me like a quilt stitched by unseen hands. For the first time, I realized my fight was larger than myself. I was not only defending bricks and mortar, I was standing for every elder treated as disposable. David arrived 2 days later, storming into the kitchen without knocking. His eyes burned. His jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might shatter. He slammed the newspaper onto the table. "What the hell is this, Ma? You've humiliated me. You've humiliated this family." His voice cracked, not with grief, but with rage. I rose slowly, my knees stiff, but my spine unbending. "You humiliated yourself, David. I only told the truth." Melissa followed him in, her lips pressed into a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Anna, do you realize what you've done? Investors are pulling out. Buyers are spooked. You've destroyed months of planning." Her voice was icy, but beneath it I heard panic. That sound was sweeter than any hymn. "Good," I said simply. "Then perhaps this house will remain what it is meant to be, a home, not a transaction." David's face reddened. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "If you think the public cares, you're wrong. Sympathy fades. Money doesn't. The law is on my side." My heart pounded, but I met his gaze without blinking. "The law may be blind, but people are not. And people are watching you now." He left in a fury, Melissa trailing behind, her perfume lingering like poison in the air. When the door shut, the house seemed to sigh with relief. I sank into a chair, exhausted but oddly triumphant. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had rattled their composure. In the following days, letters arrived, real letters, in envelopes with shaky handwriting, from strangers across the city. Some enclosed photographs of houses long since sold. Others enclosed nothing but words of encouragement. One old man wrote, "Stand strong, Anna. You are our voice." I cried over that one, my tears staining the ink until his words blurred into waves. Meanwhile, Mr. Klein called with updates. The injunction held, buying us precious weeks. But he warned me, they're preparing their case. They'll argue you're unfit, that you acted under confusion. We must be ready with evidence. Evidence. What evidence proves a mother's clarity? My memories? My heartbeat? Still, I gathered what I could. Clara helped me label photographs. Carl on the roof hammering shingles. David as a child painting the fence with a dripping brush. Me in the kitchen with flour on my cheeks. "This house is your evidence," Clara said. "Every corner tells the truth." One evening, Max came to visit, my sweet grandson, only 9, with hair the color of honey and eyes too wise for his age. Melissa must not have known, because he slipped away after school, his backpack still slung over one shoulder. He hugged me tight, his little arms fierce. "Grandma," he whispered, "Mom says you're sick. She says you don't know what you're doing. But I know you're not sick. I know you're strong." His words cracked me open. I stroked his hair, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Never forget this house, Max," I told him. "Every nail in these walls carries your grandfather's hands. This place is part of you." We sat together at the kitchen table, sharing cookies, laughter breaking through the heaviness like sunlight through clouds. For a moment, I allowed myself to dream. What if one day Max inherited not money but memory? What if he stood here as a man, telling his children about the grandmother who fought for their roots? That thought gave me more strength than any lawyer's promise. But dreams cannot stop the ticking of clocks. Days passed. Court papers arrived, thick as dictionaries. Mr. Klein guided me through each page, patient but firm. "This will be ugly," he warned. "They will try to break you." I nodded. Let them try. My heart had already been broken by the boy I raised. No courtroom could wound me deeper. The night before our first hearing, I walked the house in darkness, my hand gliding over familiar surfaces. The cool tile of the bathroom Carl had laid himself, the wooden banister polished smooth by years of touch, the dent in the kitchen table from a dropped roast. Each flaw was a heartbeat, each scar a hymn. I whispered to the walls, "Tomorrow, I carry you with me. Stand with me, as you always have." I lay down, but sleep never came. Instead, I lay awake, listening to the house creak and settle, as though it too prepared for battle. At dawn, Clara arrived to take me to court. She squeezed my hand as we stood before the heavy doors. "Remember," she said, "you are not just Anna. You are every mother who ever built something from nothing and refused to be erased." I lifted my chin, my heart pounding. The doors opened. The fight was waiting. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and polish, like a place that had been scrubbed too many times to ever feel clean. My footsteps echoed as Clara and I entered, and each echo seemed to mock me, old, old, old. The benches were hard, the ceilings high, and the walls carried portraits of men whose eyes followed you, stern and disapproving. I clutched my handbag with both hands, as though inside it I carried not tissues and spectacles, but armor. David and Melissa were already there. He wore a dark suit that hung too stiffly on his shoulders, as if he had borrowed someone else's confidence. She, in her cream-colored jacket, smiled politely at everyone she passed, the kind of smile that says, "I own this room." My heart twisted when I saw them, not because they were my opponents, but because once they were my family. The judge was a woman with iron gray hair, pulled into a bun so tight I wondered if it hurt. Her eyes were sharp, unyielding. She began by asking my lawyer to speak. Mr. Klein rose, steady as always, and told the story of an elderly widow whose trust had been misused, who had signed papers under assurances of protection, not eviction. He spoke of the house built by my husband's hands, of a lifetime of labor and sacrifice. I felt tears prick my eyes, not of weakness, but of recognition. He was telling the truth I had carried alone for so long. Then it was their turn. Their lawyer, smooth and polished like marble, painted a very different picture, a confused old woman, incapable of managing her finances, vulnerable to scams, in need of guidance. Her son only acted out of love, he said, spreading his arms as though love could be measured in bank transfers and property deeds. Melissa nodded solemnly, her hand resting on David's arm like she was guiding a child through grief. My fists clenched in my lap. At one point, the lawyer handed the judge a medical note claiming I suffered from cognitive decline. The words hit me like stones. I wanted to leap up and shout, "I may be 72, but my mind is sharp as glass." But Mr. Klein squeezed my hand, a silent reminder, patience. When the judge turned to me at last, my throat tightened, but my voice emerged steady. "Your Honor," I said, "I cooked 3 meals a day for 30 years. I raised a son who went to college without debt. I paid every bill, balanced every checkbook, remembered every birthday. If that is decline, then perhaps the world has forgotten what strength looks like in gray hair." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Even the judge's eyes softened, just for a moment. The hearing stretched on, hours melting into each other. Papers shuffled, voices droned. But beneath it all was the relentless drum of my heart. When it ended, the judge announced that further evidence was required. The decision would not come quickly. We had bought time, but the battle was far from over. Outside, the autumn air slapped my cheeks, sharp and cold. Reporters swarmed, asking questions, shoving microphones toward me. Clara shielded me, but I answered one. "I am not fighting for money," I said firmly. "I am fighting for the right to remain in the home I built with my husband, for the dignity of every elder whose years are worth more than signatures on paper." Cameras flashed, and I prayed my words would carry further than Melissa's smile ever could. That evening, exhausted, I sat in my kitchen with Clara. She poured tea, and we drank in silence. The house felt both heavier and lighter, heavier because of the burden it carried now, lighter because it had spoken through me in court. I laid my hand on the table, tracing the dent from the dropped roast, and whispered, "Carl, we stood today." Days passed. Support grew. Letters poured in again, this time faster, some from people I had never met, others from distant towns. One young woman wrote, "My grandmother lost her home the same way. You give me hope that we can change things." I pinned her letter to the fridge, where I could see it each morning, a talisman stronger than any saint's medal. But with support came hostility too. Anonymous calls at night. Selfish old woman, let your son live his life. Notes slipped under my door. You're embarrassing your family. I burned those in the stove, watching the words curl and blacken, refusing to let them stain my heart. One night, unable to sleep, I sat in the shed again. The tools glimmered faintly in the light of my lantern. I lifted Carl's hammer, heavier now than when he had used it. My arms trembled, but holding it gave me strength. I thought of David as a boy, hammering nails into birdhouses. How had the boy with sawdust in his hair become the man trying to strip me of my home? I prayed for him, despite my anger, prayed that someday he would remember not money, but love. The next hearing was scheduled. Mr. Klein warned me it would be harsher, more invasive. They would question my memory, my judgment, my sanity. They want to break you, Anna, he said gently. I nodded. Let them try. My spirit had cracks, yes, but cracks let the light through. The night before, I wrote in my journal, the one Carl had given me on our 40th anniversary. I wrote, if they take the house, they will not take my voice. If they silence me, the walls will still speak of us. If I lose, then let my loss become a warning for others. But until the last nail is pried from these boards, I will fight. I closed the book, placed it beneath my pillow, and slept more soundly than I had in months, because for the first time I understood. I was no longer just an old woman clinging to bricks. I was a soldier standing in the ruins of promises, carrying a banner stitched from memory and love, and I would not lower it, not while breath remained in me. The second hearing was set for a gray morning in late October. The courthouse steps were slick with rain, and Clara held my elbow firmly as we climbed. Inside, the air was colder than the street. The hall smelled faintly of coffee and fear. I sat down on the wooden bench, my hands folded tightly around my handbag, and told myself, you've scrubbed floors, birthed a child, buried a husband. You can face this too. When they called my name, I walked forward slowly, each step deliberate. The opposing lawyer wasted no time. His voice was polite but sharp, every question designed to pierce. Mrs. Novak, do you recall the exact date you signed the power of attorney? My memory did not stretch to exact dates, but I remembered the soup bubbling on the stove, the smell of dill, the way Melissa placed the pen in my hand. No, I admitted, not the date, but I remember the deception. He raised his eyebrows as though I had confirmed his suspicions. You see, Your Honor, he said smoothly, she cannot recall details. She is unreliable. Anger surged in me, hotter than shame. I straightened my back. I may not recall the date, I said firmly, but I recall the truth. My husband and I built our home with our own hands. My son promised to protect me. Instead, he stripped me of savings and tried to sell the very walls that sheltered him as a boy. That is what I recall, and I will not forget it until my last breath. The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, her pen pausing above her notes. Then Melissa took the stand. She looked immaculate, her voice sweet, her tone measured. She spoke of concern for my safety, of how the stairs in the house were too steep, how I sometimes misplaced my glasses or repeated stories. We love her, she said, her hand pressed theatrically against her chest. We only want what's best. Her lies dripped like honey, but they stuck in my throat like thorns. Mr. Klein countered with the folder of evidence, letters, photographs, the recordings Clara had urged me to make. He played a snippet in court, my own voice, trembling but clear, recounting how I discovered the letter about the final viewing. The sound of my words filled the chamber, echoing against stone walls. For the first time, I believed in my own strength as much as others had. The hearing stretched long. When it ended, the judge declared she would need more time before ruling. Relief and exhaustion washed over me in equal measure. Outside, reporters waited again. One asked, "Do you think you'll win, Mrs. Novak?" I looked straight into the camera. Winning is not the point. Standing is, and I will stand. That night, back in my kitchen, Clara and I shared bread and cheese by the lamplight. "You were magnificent," she said. I shook my head. I was terrified. She smiled softly. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's speaking through it. Days passed. The article about the hearing spread wider than the first. Strangers stopped me on the street, pressing my hand, whispering encouragement. A local community group invited me to speak at a gathering about elder rights. I hesitated, but Clara insisted. "Anna, your voice has power. Use it." So I went. In a small hall filled with folding chairs, I stood before men and women, some younger, some my age. My knees trembled, but when I opened my mouth, the words flowed. I told them about Carl, about the butter-yellow walls, about David's betrayal. I saw tears in strangers' eyes, nods of recognition, fists clenched in solidarity. When I finished, they rose to their feet in applause that thundered louder than any gavel. I left that hall taller than I had entered. But victory breeds new battles. Soon after, another letter arrived. This one colder, more final. David and Melissa were demanding compensation for damages to their reputation caused by my public speaking. The irony stung. They had stolen from me, and now they claimed I had stolen from them. I burned that letter too, but the smoke filled me with dread. Could they truly twist the world so completely? One evening, as I sat alone, Max slipped through the door again. He hugged me fiercely, his backpack thudding against my side. "Grandma," he whispered, "Mom says you'll lose, but I don't want you to lose." My throat ached as I held him. "Even if I do, Max, remember this. Losing a house is not losing a soul. They can take wood and stone, but they cannot take what Carl and I built in love." His eyes shimmered, wiser than his years. "Then I'll keep it here," he said, tapping his chest. "Safe." When he left, I sat long into the night, the house breathing around me. I thought of Carl again, of his voice steady and low. "Stone by stone, Anna." I whispered back, "Yes, stone by stone, until the last one." The next court date loomed like a storm on the horizon. My body felt frailer by the day, but my spirit grew sharper. If they wanted to prove me unfit, they would have to face the woman who had scrubbed, stitched, cooked, and carried a family on her back for decades. I would not falter. And yet, beneath all my resolve, one fear still gnawed quietly. If the law decided against me, would the house survive the betrayal? Or would it become nothing more than walls stripped of memory, sold to strangers who would never hear Carl's laughter echoing in the hall? The morning of the third hearing, I woke before dawn. The house was dark, except for the faint glow of the street lamp spilling across the curtains. I brewed coffee instead of tea. Carl always said coffee was for battles, tea for peace. As the bitter steam filled the kitchen, I traced my fingers over the edge of the table, the scar from the Christmas roast, and whispered, "Stay with me." It felt like I was speaking not only to the wood, but to the spirit of everything Carl and I had built here. When Clara arrived, she found me dressed already, my handbag packed with papers and photographs. She studied me with pride. "You look ready," she said. I smiled faintly. "I don't feel ready, but I don't think warriors ever do." Together we walked out into the cold morning, the path slick with fallen leaves. Each step away from the house felt like a test. Will I see you again? The courtroom was fuller this time. Reporters, activists, curious citizens, faces blurred into a sea of eyes. My story had spread further than I imagined. Some clutched newspapers, others phones. I heard whispers. That's her, the widow fighting her son. My cheeks burned, but I straightened my spine. If my pain had become public property, then let it serve a purpose. The proceedings began with new evidence. Their lawyer presented bank records, carefully arranged to suggest I had mismanaged my finances. He listed purchases, large grocery bills, charity donations, even the repairs I had paid for after a storm damaged the roof. Reckless spending, he called it. I laughed bitterly under my breath. Reckless? Feeding a family? Donating to the church? Fixing the roof Carl laid himself? If that was reckless, then every good woman of my generation was guilty. When my turn came, Mr. Klein guided me to the stand. His questions were gentle, allowing me to tell my story in my own words. I spoke of the nights Carl and I spent building the house piece by piece, of David as a boy playing with toy trucks across the floorboards, of the years I balanced bills down to the last coin. My voice shook, but not with confusion, with conviction. At one point, I pulled from my bag a photograph of Carl on the roof, hammer in hand, the house rising behind him. I held it up for the court to see. This is not just property, I said. This is love made solid. The judge's face softened again, though her gavel remained still. I could not know what weighed in her mind, but for a moment I believed she understood. After the session, outside the courthouse, a small group waited. They held signs, "Protect our elders. Homes are not inheritances." My throat tightened. Strangers fighting for me. Some hugged me, others pressed my hands. One young man whispered, "My mother lost everything to my sister's greed. Thank you for standing." Their support filled me with a strength no court could grant. But David and Melissa stood across the street, watching. His jaw was hard, her eyes cold. I saw in them not regret, not even guilt, but determination. They would not stop. As Clara drove me home, I stared out the window at the blurred city lights and thought, this war may end only with ashes. That night, I could not sleep. I wandered the house, touching walls, opening cupboards, inhaling the smells of spices and old wood. In the living room, I sat before the quilt draped over the sofa, the one Carl's mother had sewn. I ran my fingers over its worn stitches. Memories surged, birthdays, storms weathered, nights of laughter, nights of tears. I realized then that even if the walls fell into other hands, the essence of our life here was stitched into me. They could not auction that. Still, I would not surrender. The next morning, I wrote again in my journal, "If they call me unfit, let them. If they call me stubborn, let them. I will wear every insult as armor, for this house is my battlefield, and love is my weapon." Later that week, Max appeared again. He looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder as though afraid of being caught. He sat at the table, swinging his legs. "Grandma," he whispered, "Dad says you're making enemies." But I told him, "You're making history." My chest ached at his words. History. To a child, I was not a burden, but a story worth telling. I hugged him, breathing in the scent of crayons and autumn air in his hair. "Promise me, Max," I said softly, "that no matter what happens, you'll remember the truth." He nodded solemnly, eyes wide, and whispered, I promise. The promise of a child carried me through the following days, but as the next hearing approached, my body betrayed me. My knees ached, my chest tightened, and exhaustion clung to me like a wet coat. Clara urged me to rest, but how could I? Every moment felt borrowed. I feared that if I sat still too long, the fight would march on without me. On the eve of the next session, I stood in the shed once more. The tools gleamed faintly in the lamplight. I picked up Carl's hammer and held it against my chest. "Stone by stone," I whispered, repeating his words. "If they want this house, they will have to take me with it." The night air was sharp. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the wind rattled the branches. I felt very small, yet very rooted, like the house itself, weathered, cracked, but still standing. And in that moment, I swore to myself I would see this fight through, even if it was the last fight of my life. The fourth hearing came on a day when the sky hung low and heavy, as if it too carried the weight of my years. Claire and I entered the courthouse without speaking, her arm firm around mine. Inside, the air buzzed with tension. I saw reporters again, their pens ready, their cameras poised. Somewhere behind them, David sat rigid, his face carved from stone, and Melissa adjusted her pearl earrings as though preparing for a dinner party rather than a war. This time, they attacked me directly. The opposing lawyer asked endless questions meant to trap me. "Mrs. Novak, do you remember the date of your wedding, the year your son was born, the day you retired?" Each answer I gave, even when correct, he twisted. "So you forget details but expect us to trust your memory about the documents?" His words dripped with condescension. I gripped the edge of the witness stand, my fingers white. At last, I leaned forward and said, "Sir, if you are married, I doubt you remember the exact date of your honeymoon, but I bet you remember the feeling of holding your wife's hand. That is memory. That is truth. And the truth is, I was tricked into signing away the home my husband built." The courtroom stirred. Even the judge pressed her lips together, hiding a reaction. Then came David's turn. He stood, his voice breaking as he described his concern for me. "She forgets where she places things," he said, his eyes glistening with false sorrow. "Once she called me twice in the same day with the same story. I was afraid she might fall victim to scams. I only wanted to protect her." He paused dramatically. Melissa dabbed her eyes with a tissue. The performance was flawless. To the court, perhaps convincing. To me, it was betrayal staged for applause. When my lawyer rose to cross-examine, he asked David a simple question. "Did you ever ask your mother if she wanted to sell her home?" Silence. David shifted, cleared his throat. We discussed it." "No," I said loudly from my seat, unable to hold back. "We never did." The judge rapped her gavel, warning me, but the truth was already out, hanging in the air like smoke that refuses to dissipate. The hearing ended unresolved, once again deferred. The law moves like a snail, but each step forward feels like a mountain climbed. Outside, the reporters gathered. One asked David, "Do you regret fighting your mother?" He snapped, "I regret that she forced me into this circus." His words spread through newspapers and television by nightfall, and the tide of public opinion began to shift. Messages poured into my mailbox, some cruel, but many supportive. "Stay strong, Anna. You are showing us how to fight." Back at home, exhaustion swept over me like a storm. My body felt brittle, as though my bones might crack from the weight of it all. Clara made me soup and scolded me gently. You must rest. A soldier cannot fight every hour. But how could I rest when each day might bring another letter, another threat, another attempt to strip me of my dignity? One evening as I sat by the window, I saw David outside. He had not knocked. He stood on the sidewalk, staring at the house. His shoulders sagged, his face pale. For a moment, I saw not the man who betrayed me, but the boy who once built birdhouses with Carl, who scraped his knee and came running to me for comfort. My heart twisted. I wanted to open the door, to call his name, to beg him to remember love. But then Melissa appeared beside him, her hand slipping into his, her voice sharp as glass. Whatever softness had flickered in his eyes vanished. They turned away together, swallowed by the night. The next day, Mr. Klein visited me at home. He spread papers across the table, witness statements, photographs, medical records. We are building a strong case, he said, but you must prepare yourself. They will try again to prove incapacity. They may even bring doctors to testify against you. My stomach clenched. To be dissected like that, my mind prodded and judged, terrified me more than any eviction notice, but I nodded. Let them try. My mind may be old, but it is not broken. That night, Max came quietly, as he often did. He sat at the table, eating cookies with solemn seriousness. Grandma, he whispered, I heard Dad yelling. He said you're destroying everything, but I don't believe him. You're saving something. His small hand slipped into mine, warm and sure. When I grow up, I'll tell people about you. Tears blurred my vision. Tell them the truth, Max, I said, even if it hurts. Later, after he left, I walked the rooms again. The walls seemed to pulse with memory. Carl whistling in the kitchen, David laughing in the garden, my own voice humming lullabies into the night. I pressed my hand to the wall and whispered, we are not done. The next hearing loomed like a storm cloud. I knew the fight was reaching its breaking point. Whether I triumphed or fell, the end was near. My body felt weaker each day, but my resolve grew sharper. I began writing letters for Max to be given to him one day. Letters filled with stories of his grandfather, of love, of resilience. If I could not save the house, I would at least save the memory. As I sealed the first letter, I looked around the kitchen and thought, perhaps I cannot win for myself, but I can win for him. And that thought carried me into the night, stronger than fear, steadier than despair. The final hearing arrived with winter's first snow. The courthouse steps were dusted white, the air sharp enough to sting my lungs. Clara tightened her scarf around my neck, whispering, this is it, Anna. However it ends, you've already won something bigger. I nodded, though my legs trembled beneath me. As we entered, I felt the cold follow us in, clinging to my bones. The courtroom was fuller than ever. Reporters lined the back, activists filled the benches, and even strangers stood pressed against the walls. At the front sat David and Melissa, polished as ever. He looked tired now, though, his eyes shadowed, his jaw set in defiance. She sat upright, lips thin, pearls gleaming under the harsh light. The judge entered, and silence fell like a blanket. Papers shuffled, voices called order. The proceedings began. The opposing lawyer moved swiftly, presenting their final arguments, that I was unfit, that my son had acted responsibly, that the sale was in my best interest. He spoke of numbers, market values, care facilities. He painted me as fragile, confused, incapable. Each word was a dagger, but I sat still, my spine straight. I had carried heavier weights than this man's polished cruelty. Then Mr. Klein rose. His voice was steady, calm, but underneath it burned a fire. He spoke not of numbers, but of life. He spoke of a widow who had given decades to a family, who had signed papers under false assurances, who now faced losing not just property, but identity. He held up the photograph of Carl on the roof, hammer in hand. "This house is not an asset," he said. "It is a legacy, and it should not be stripped away under the guise of protection." At last, the judge turned to me. "Mrs. Novak," she said, "you may speak before I make my ruling." I rose slowly, my knees stiff, my heart pounding. The room blurred for a moment, then sharpened. I saw Carl's face in memory, Max's small hand in mine, Clara's steady eyes. I took a breath. "This house was built with love," I began, my voice trembling but strong. "Brick by brick, nail by nail, my husband and I shaped it with our hands. Within these walls I raised my son. I cooked meals, I mended clothes, I buried my husband, and I prayed for strength. I am not confused. I am not unfit. I am old, yes, but age is not weakness. Age is the proof that I have endured. My son betrayed me not out of love, but out of greed. And even now, I stand here not only for myself, but for every mother, every widow, every elder who has been silenced, tricked, or discarded. If you take this house from me, you may win on paper, but you cannot erase the truth written in its walls, nor the love that built it." Silence filled the courtroom. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud as a drum. The judge's face softened, then hardened again as she shuffled her papers. "I have considered the evidence," she said at last. "It is clear that Mrs. Novak signed documents without full understanding of their consequences. While her son acted within legal bounds, the spirit of the law must also be considered. Therefore, the transfer of property is void. The house remains in Mrs. Novak's possession." The words struck me like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Clara gripped my hand until it hurt, tears streaming down her cheeks. Reporters scribbled furiously, and David, my son, his face collapsed, fury and shame warring across his features. Melissa whispered something sharp in his ear, but he would not look at me. I wanted to rejoice, to laugh, to shout, but instead I felt only a deep, trembling relief. My knees gave way, and I sank back into my chair. The house was mine, ours, safe. Outside, cameras flashed, microphones pressed toward me. "How do you feel, Mrs. Novak?" I raised my head, my voice steady. "I feel heard, and I pray that no one else will have to fight their own child for dignity." That evening, back in my kitchen, the house felt alive again. The walls seemed warmer, the floors steadier beneath my feet. I lit a candle, placed it beside Carl's photograph, and whispered, "We did it, my love, stone by stone." Later, Max came running in, breathless, his cheeks flushed from the cold. "Grandma, is it true? You get to stay?" I knelt, pulling him into my arms. "Yes, Max, this is still our home." He hugged me fiercely. "When I grow up, I'll tell everyone about you." My eyes filled with tears. "Then tell them this, that love is stronger than greed, and that we must never let silence steal what is ours." As night settled, I sat with Clara by the fire. We drank tea, the kind meant for peace, not battle. I felt the weight lift from my shoulders at last. The house hummed quietly, like a body at rest. I knew time was short. My years ahead were fewer than those behind, but I also knew I had secured something greater than walls. I had secured memory, dignity, and a story worth telling. And so I ask you, watching and listening now. Did you like my story? From which city are you watching?